Okay, I don't know if it's socially acceptable to say this or not, but fuck it, I don't care. I didn't really like Season 3 of Sherlock that much. Collectively, loads of us seem to live in a state of denial about it, saying, yeah, it was good and everything, but it wasn't quite up to scratch. But yeah, comparing it to Seasons 1 and 2, I just really didn't think it lived up to those standards. It did have its moments, of course, it always does. I did like most of Empty Hearse and bits and pieces of His Last Vow, but as a whole, I just felt the show was starting to become a victim of its own success. Most of that was down to me, Sherlock himself appeared to be mutating into Sheldon from Big Bang Theory. There was a much higher amount of comedic exchanges, with an emphasis on how he doesn't know about normal human emotions, and there was all this really cringy sitcom-y stuff about how Sherlock has done a sex with a lady? Oh my god, that has totally blown my mind. That, and while the show had always been over-stylized, Season 3 was so over-stylized that it started to border on parody. Yes, I am talking about the sequence where he gets shot, which made me burst out laughing at least 8 times when I'm certain the intent was to force me onto the edge of my seat by any means possible, and they couldn't choose one way of doing it, so they just decided to do them all at once, and I just felt it was serious overkill. So I wasn't really sure what to expect from the long-hyped Sherlock Christmas special, and was hoping it wouldn't be something really stupid, like a Sherlock Christmas Carol or something. It's not going to be a Sherlock Christmas Carol, is it? Please say it's not going to be... Oh, thank God, Moffat's learnt his lesson. Then it turns out that it's not specifically a Christmas special, it's a New Year's special. And then it turns out that it's allegedly a traditional Sherlock Holmes tale set in the Victorian era. And immediately lots of the fan base, not to say I was one of them, thought, given Season 3 ended on a cliffhanger, deciding to return 2 years later with a cutaway story and with no sign of a 4th series anytime soon... You know, there's taking a creative risk and then there's just testing people's patience. Conversely, however, my stupid fanboy brain was immediately theorising about how they were going to use this now we're back in the 19th century conceit. I mean, I would have accepted it with open arms if it was just a random out-of-character episode done as an experiment. Actually, I would have totally loved that. I do like me some old-school Sherlock Holmes, and Martin Freeman and Benedict Cumberbatch are fucking awesome. If it was just a random out-of-character episode, that would have been pretty fucking great. But then, this horrific thought just sort of crawled across my brain and went, they're not just gonna go, and then Sherlock woke up in modern times and it was all a dream. They're not gonna do that, are they? No, of course not. As much as I've slung shit at Moffat and Gatiss' recent work, they are intelligent guys, they know much better than to actually do the, and then they woke up and it was all a dream, and... Wait a second, there was that Doctor Who Christmas special from last year, and... Oh, for fuck's sake, are you fucking kidding me? Yeah, sorry for having to go into such massive spoilers in case you haven't seen it yet, but I was afraid this was going to happen because I could just picture the conversation that was going on between Moffat and Gatiss. So, I've got an idea. How about we do a one-off special set in the classic Sherlock Holmes period? But wait a second, Mark. Won't the audience start conjecturing wild theories about what this all means in Sherlock continuity, instead of just focusing on the actual plot of the piece? And we did end Series 3 on a cliffhanger, we've got to tie it into the story arc, don't we? At which point, if I were in the room that day, I would smash both my fists on the table and scream, "No, you don't!" While I do see why you would think that at first, that's a very oversimplistic assumption, and it's allowing your awareness of your audience to tamper with the workings of the show. And it'll just overburden the piece with tiresome continuity dumping. All we want you to do is just tell a compelling story. Don't just waste everyone's time with the show just sticking its head up its own arse. You're a detective show. Your viewers are here for a mystery. Right? Isn't everybody here for a mystery? Is it really just me? It can't be just me, can it? You know, like the one with the poison pills in Season 1? People don't just want fan wanks, do they? Given Sherlock gets millions of viewers worldwide and Moff and Gatiss have international fame, and I'm some fucker on the internet, clearly I'm the one talking bollocks, but whatever. I must underline here that I didn't totally dislike The Abominable Bride. The first half of it I thought was pretty good and appeared to be shaping up to be what I was hoping for. A fairly solid, if flawed, one-off out-of-character episode, but something must have got lost between drafts somewhere because the special has turned out exactly how I feared it would. It's way too full of itself, and it's too keen to pat itself on the back all the bloody time for being so clever and brilliant and amazing. There's a shit ton of dramatic irony piled onto it, nodding references, parallels to the modern day Sherlock, and almost fourth wall breaking moments. Yes, out of character episodes can and do this as a sort of, hey viewer, you know how the show's normally like this? Well, for 1 week only, it's like this. Isn't that crazy? I mean, Buffy did that all the time when it tried weird out-of-character concepts, but the problem is the way it's done in Abominable Bride, I'd liken it to a kid playing hide-and-seek, where the reason that he gets caught is because he's giggling too loudly to himself about how clever he's being. If you're too knowing about it, it totally ruins the effect. The Abominable Bride just spends most of its runtime going, ooh, look at us, we're in one of those historical times and everything.
I'm part of a campaign, you know.
Oh, campaign?
Votes for women.
And are you for or against?
This was a thing that was happening at the time. I read it in my textbook. Okay, to defer some more negativity for a bit, I'll lay off the general feel of the episode and talk a bit about the plot. So the special starts with Watson first running into Sherlock as he's beating off over a corpse in a mortuary. Ew, Moffat! I know that you usually write like a horny teenager, but show some bloody restraint. Oh, sorry, I read that wrong. So, Watson first runs into Holmes beating a corpse for some reason in a mortuary, and we basically spend about 15 minutes just painting a picture of this 19th century world that Sherlock inhabits. As said, it's a bit full of itself, but it's fine enough, pretty well written. And then we head into our plot about this mad bride who appears to have killed herself before showing up later that day to shoot her husband, and everyone thinks it's her vengeful spirit that's shown up to get revenge against him because he's a massive prick or something. Now, I actually really like that as a plot, something that seems supernatural that's clearly going to turn out to have some sort of logical explanation. It kind of set me in mind of Jonathan Creek, particularly season 3, where they do some really mental stuff. There's this one about a man who thinks that he sold his soul to the devil, and there was this really weird one about a guy hoaxing an alien skeleton. The only real problem is the episode itself doesn't seem to think that the plots are nearly as interesting as the parts of the Sherlock universe already in place, Holmes, Mycroft, etc., and padding out the runtime with jokes at the expense of the change in setting. I kind of get the feeling that Moffat and Gatiss are both pining for their comedy days because there were just so many quips and comedy bits in this one. Like in this bit here where they're doing sign language and Watson accidentally does sign language wrong and says something rude that he didn't mean to say. And really, who thought that Mycroft eating himself to death to die of consumption for a bet was a good idea? Oh, I get it. It's like opposite day on Sherlock. Clever. I mean, I'm not against Sherlock trying to be funny. I did laugh a fair few times, and how, as mentioned, I like Jonathan Creek, and Jonathan Creek is sort of partly a comedy. But it's just really hard to take your plot seriously when your characters just decide to stop the episode for a minute to have a funny conversation about Sherlock's sexual impulses. Yes, I do like a witty back and forth between detectives and sexual tension and all that shit. I mean, that's been ingrained by decades of detective shows, but in this I just felt it went a bit too overboard and it detracts from the episode's more serious moments. I mean, the episode's more serious moments are effective. As I mentioned earlier, I felt season 3 was a bit over-stylized, but I felt this episode's approach to being over-stylized worked a lot better. There was that really atmospheric bit where the bride shows up to threaten Eustace. Douglas McKinnon has actually done a really good job as director, and he is easily the best thing about the episode, alongside Una Stubbs, who's always fun as Mrs. Hudson. If this had just been a straight 90 minutes mystery of the Abominable Bride in the 19th century, with no relation to season 3, I really don't think I would have minded, and if it had been good enough, I don't think people would have minded so much about a cutaway to do something else after season 3 ended on a cliffhanger. You know, just a change of time period, just to try it. But then, of course, approximately an hour in, the episode vanished up its own arsehole in making this all about Moriarty. The cliffhanger to Series 3 where Moriarty reappears was obviously done to try and set everyone off into wild theories again, like at the end of Series 2 where everyone wanted to know how Sherlock survived that fall off that roof, which was arguably one of the things that took Sherlock from very successful to basically the king of the BBC's output. But just try saying this out loud with me. Sherlock tries to figure out how Moriarty's reappeared by entering a drug-induced dream state where he has to solve an unrelated murder case from the 19th century, which is sort of a bit like what happened to Moriarty, and solving it will help him figure the Moriarty thing out. Just for all Moffat and Gatiss were talking up how this story had to be told in the 19th century, I really don't know how they reached that conclusion that that's the only way to get the explanation for Moriarty's reappearance out there. Because that appears to be the episode's primary purpose from the way the last half hour goes. That becomes the most important aspect of the episode, and the actual plot that we've been following gets relegated to secondary importance. Which really pissed me off because I was actually interested in it. I just really don't see why this entire concept of a past set episode inside Sherlock's Mind Palace was utterly necessary to get this bit of the story arc out there. I mean, if we're talking about artistic requirements, yes, there are certain stories that can only be told on certain formats, in certain settings, with certain people. Some of the greatest works of literature wouldn't work nearly as well if certain things about them were changed. A single element can make all the difference between a good work and a great one. And while I get the story of the Abominable Bride being more of a 19th century story than a modern day one, it's a very gothic tale that just screams 19th century. But does it really all have to be told inside Sherlock's head as a means of figuring out the Moriarty thing? Really, I'm just trying to understand how they reached that conclusion. As said, I really don't see why this episode couldn't have just been its own story. As is, it's essentially just a connecting bit between seasons 3 and 4. The sort of thing usually done in minisodes as something extra to fill a minor gap between series rather than a special occasion in its own right. Which it really could have been if the episode realised that this story about the bride is better than getting too bogged down with the Sherlock universe, and the show basically spending 90 minutes sucking its own dick. Speaking of which...
You have a magnificent brain, Moriarty. I admire it.
Your brain is so massive, Jim. Am I watching a Stephen Moffat porno? Oh yeah, and another thing, if this is all a drug-induced dream sequence Sherlock's having while off his face, then where the fuck were my dancing pink elephants smoking reefers? Why is this fantasy world so normal? Come on, what the fuck do I pay my license fee for? Well, it does go off the rails towards the end, of course, where we get the reveal to the mystery that apparently the case of the Abominable Bride that murders dickish men was a conspiracy by a group of hardcore suffragettes in KKK hoods.
Holmes, could it have been twins?
No,
Why not?
because it's never twins.
Yes, Watson, it being twins is the stupid idea.
Flying machines, these telephone contraptions? What sort of lunatic fantasy is that?
It was simply my conjecture of what a future world might look like and how you and I might fit inside it.
Oh, I get it. It's like dramatic irony, right? So yeah, all in all, The Abominable Bride wasn't a total washout. It had potential and it had some good stuff in it, but that last half hour seriously needed chucking into a fire and the rest of it given about 3 or 4 redrafts. Seriously, an entire year's worth of hype for this?